if you hadn't been an actor, what would you have been?
On the dole. I think permanently. I come from generations of theatre people, you see, and we've never done anything else. I would have been in it in some capacity, undoubtedly. A minstrel, perhaps, or, an itinerant minstrel. My aunt, my great-aunts were actresses and opera singers. My great-aunt Decima was one of the three little girls in Gilbert Sullivan, the original. And Dame Eva Moore was another one of my great-aunts, whose daughter married Larry Olivier, and so he was my cousin by marriage. And my father was Roland Pertwee, playwright. My brother is Michael, my cousin is Bill, and so all the Pertwees are connected with the theatre in some capacity. And so I suppose I would have been in it in some way.
You say you were in the Navy for 6 years during the war. Did that help when you came to do the radio show, The Navy Lark?
No, enormously, yes. Yes, all the experiences of the lower deck. I was in the lower deck for a long time. And I was in Russian convoys, and I was in submarines, and so I had sort of experience in all kinds of ships. And that helped tremendously, because one was able to give Laurie Wyman and George Evans some sort of idea of stories, lower deck stories, and the attitudes of lower deck. And then later, my cousin, James Pertwee, he was the captain of the Trowbridge, and our ship, remember, in the Navy Lark, was called the Troutbridge, which was a takeoff of the Trowbridge. And he used to write to us and tell us of the true experiences and things that had happened to him. And nobody would believe him, really. Things that happened in the Navy Lark actually happened to Trowbridge.
Because you did a lot of the voices, as well as being chief petty officer.
Yes, later, when Ronnie Barker left. For many years, I just played chief petty officer Pertwee, because I'd been for years working on radio where I'd been other people's voice men, like with Eric Barker or with Julian Morris and so on. And I was doing just character voices then, trick voices. Like Dick Emery did for me when I had my own series, I did for Eric Barker, and Maurice Denham and Sam Costa, and these actors like that were working with in radio for like Much Binding in the Marsh. And later I got bored, though, just playing one character, so when Ronnie Barker left, because he had far too much to do, he became so big and so important that he had to leave. He couldn't manage the Sunday pension meetings, which we used to all have. And so I then said, Alistair Scott Johnson, the producer, said, who on earth are we going to get to do all the voices now Ronnie's left? And I said, nobody, me, I want to do it. And so until we finished, we ran 18 and a half years, nearly 19 years. We were the longest running radio comedy show in the history of broadcasting anywhere in the world. And so right up until the end, I played a lot of eccentric character voices, which I loved.
Do you believe that there is such a thing as a natural talent, one that needs no tuition at all?
It's a very good question, because you've hit the nail right on the head. I don't believe you can teach anybody to act. I think you have to have a natural talent, and if you haven't got it, you may as well retire. You could probably work. I've seen enough examples of it, of people who are working that shouldn't be, which is tragic, because there's so many people who are good that should be working, whereas the people that were working shouldn't be. I think it'd be good in some ways if we were a bit more like Russia, that if you aren't up to a standard, you don't get the jobs. But other people can think that, that there are powers that say no, whereas here you get the influence and the friend and the wife's cousin. I mean, that still exists. Not as bad as it used to, but it still does.
You said you've been bored by playing the same person for too long. Have you ever actually seriously disliked a role?
Yes, very much. I was over 2 years, as a featured gentleman in a musical called Irene. It was enormously successful, and I hated every moment of it, because it was a high camp character. He was a sort of high camp dress designer, who turned out in the end not to be a high camp dress designer at all, but French he was supposed to be, Madame Louise or Madame Loulou or something. And in fact, he was a sort of bog Irishman, and who was in love with Irene's mum and had been years before. But there wasn't one single line of wit in it, in the script. So all the humour had to come out of a high campery. And I can't stand that. I get desperately bored with it. I like to be able to make people laugh by the use of one's talent as how you present the music of your words.
Would you say that when you were cast as Doctor Who, it was perhaps your first emergence into really big-time popularity?
On television? Yes, I'd had an enormous popularity, thank God, from steam radio, because before the advent of television, of course, radio was all important. And from radio, if you were a success on radio, you went onto the music halls, if you could, and did a music hall act, did a stand-up comedy act. And that was the tops of the music hall theatres were then the stars, really, apart from the film stars. And they came from radio, usually. So that was my first very, very, very big success in television, although I'd done a lot of television before. I had done other series. I'd had my own series on television, which was a complete disaster, because I was made to do things I didn't want to do. I wanted to do a situation comedy show, half-hour sitcom with a storyline, and Ronnie Wallman, who was then in charge of that branch of the BBC, said no, he didn't think that was right for me. He wanted me to do a review-type show, like a Morecambe and Wise show, that sort of show. And I didn't want to. I was basically an actor, always had been. And nobody would listen to me. They wouldn't let me do a sitcom show. In fact, Terry Thomas was the first to do one successfully. And then, so I did the review-type show, and it was dreadful. It was absolutely awful. And I dug myself a grave that it took me many, many years to get out of.
Why do you think that all the Doctor Whos have been so totally dissimilar?
Well, we're not terribly dissimilar, actually. I think that if you look at the noses of Pat Troughton and the lines here, Tom Baker, myself, Pat, and Bill Hartnell have all got that a bit, and I think to a degree Colin Baker has, and Peter didn't. Peter was very sort of handsome, and he wasn't the same type at all. But I think the rest of us had a certain similarity.
Now, moving on to Worzel Gummidge, he's also very much a lovely fantasy character. Are you also a fantasy character?
Very much so, yes. In fact, nearly all the things I wanted to do on television have always been involved with fantasy. And mercifully, two of them that I have done have both been fantasy, Doctor Who and Worzel.
Your most recent television appearance was as the flamboyant artist Whistler. Did you have to do a lot of research for that?
I did a certain amount of photographic research, and so to make absolutely sure that the makeup was right, I looked as much like Whistler as possible. Quite obviously, the press and the media thought so too, because I've never had so much publicity for appearing in such a short piece. In fact, I think it only ran 20 minutes, which was plainly nothing whatsoever to do with the piece or the fact that I was playing Whistler, but purely that they loved the photographs. So we got a tremendous coverage because the photographs were fun, and they looked terribly like Whistler.
Are you ever surprised when an old film of yours in black and white suddenly comes up on the television for a Monday matinee or something?
Horrified, yes. I hate them.
Do you watch?
Sometimes, well, you can't avoid it. You know, you happen to be sitting up with your feet up in the afternoon, and you say, "Oh my God, I'm on." A lot of things, of course, don't wear well. A lot of those early post-war British movies haven't worn well at all. Certain things on radio, I mean, Eric Barker's work on radio wears forever. It doesn't date at all. It's remarkable. But those films, they didn't wear at all well. I could well do without them. Except some, I mean, like Mr. Drake's Duck or something, that's shown all over the world continuously. I don't mind that being shown, because that was fun. That was a fun picture, and it's worn very well.
Well, Mr. Pertwee, John, I think you've worn very well indeed.
Thank you. Yeah, I was an old age pensioner last Wednesday. And I find to my horror that I can't draw the money. That's sad.